Hey everyone, welcome to Neura Pod. Today I'm really excited to have on a guest, Dr. Frederic Gilbert. He's located in Tasmania, Australia, and he was one of the authors of a paper that I read that's related to humans and their interactions or their experiences when they have a brain-computer interface implant. So after reading that paper, I was really interested in some of the research that he's been doing and wanted to get his take on what he thinks like the field is progressing towards and some of the pros and cons of Neuralink, and just overall get a sense of like what his research has been. So super excited to have him on and just have a conversation. So yeah, Dr. Gilbert, do you mind just telling the audience a little bit about yourself and some of the research you've done?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Ryan, for the invitation. I'm looking forward to discussing the ethics of brain-computer interface. I hope we're going to talk about it. I guess that's why you invited me. So my background, so I'm a philosopher by training. I did a PhD on free will and how neurobiological technologies might impact the concept of free will and potentially the consequences on the notion of responsibility, law, etc. And I've been working the last 12 years on the ethics associated with invasive brain technologies, especially in implantable brain-computer interfaces, how electrodes put in the brain might impact or understanding of, for instance, concept of the sense of the self, agency, identity, autonomy, etc. So I look at the concerns associated with implanting material or device in the brain.
Awesome. And so I guess for undergrad, were you studying similar things, similar related fields?
So, so I did my master and PhD in Geneva in Switzerland. So I did study applied ethics of medical ethics. A question associated with neuroethics in general. So how, for instance, a stem cell and injected in the brain might also interfere or impair one understanding of themselves. And I also associate with the question of sorry paradox. So at what point these stem cells stop being stem cell, but yourself. So what the famous paradox in philosophy. So that was my master, and the PhD, yeah, we're associated with, neuroethical issues. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So do you mind telling the audience a little bit about the paper that you guys published? I assume you've published many papers, but the one that I saw was 6 different patients with a brain-computer interface implant, and they've had.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
No, please.
and they had like a variety of different outcomes.
Yeah. So the paper that attracted your attention is one of the 4 papers that we published about that very study. So the clinical trial itself was reported in the Lancet Neurology by Cook and colleagues in 2013. And we started to closely monitor patients' experience with being implanted with this brain-computer interface. So the technology is pretty brilliant. So it's capable of predicting or forecasting epileptic seizure. As such, alert the patient ahead, and as such, the patient need to decide whether or not they will trust the device or simply, rest, lay, or keep going. That's the choice. But the technology was quite successful. The company that was running the experiment was called NeuroVista. They have since bankrupt, which also raised a couple of ethical questions. But yeah, so the study itself, we were trying to understand the phenomenology of being implanted with brain-computer interface. So we have this positive image about the fact that if you were implanted and if the technology worked perfectly well, therefore your life will be enhanced, your life will be better. So we wanted to look at the subjective experience of being implanted with this brain-computer interface, this smart technology. And we realized that, yeah, in most of the case, yes, it has worked well for the patient. And in some respect, actually we have two patients that describe sort of mergence with the technology. It seems that their self is merging with the technology. In one of the cases, it led to I would say, a de novo person, a new person emerged out of the emergence. But in the other case, we have a patient that had their existence drastically changed and radically, well, I would say, has induced some radical distress, psychological distress to the patient. So it seems that even if you merge with the technology, even if the technology seems to be effective, meet the therapeutic outcome, it didn't translate necessarily and positively for all the patients, if I may say so. And I guess that's how we have to approach these novel implantable technologies, to keep a very secure eyes on safety and how the human experience is being impacted by the technology. So this is basically what have revealed the paper. Overall, most patients had positive psychological experience, but we have noticed that a patient has experienced radical distress that led to some form of depression, depressive symptoms. And again, despite the fact that the technology was working well and have meet the therapeutic outcome, endpoint.
Yeah, I thought it was so fascinating to read through that paper, because I just expected most of, like, all of the outcomes to be positive, especially if the technology works. And so somebody can basically have a sensor to tell them if they're going to have a seizure. Like, that sounds so incredibly positive. And then, yeah, just being able to like read some of the patient's description of the feelings that they had, that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So these were narratives. So we have a lot of data. So I can't remember, 6 or 7 hours. Well, I can't remember exactly. I will send your audience to look at the paper itself. I'm not sure if there will be a link or.
Yep. I'll make sure to include one
below
below
the
the
paper
video.
in the comment. But yeah, so we have a lot of data. We were only able to analyze some of it. But for, I guess the interesting part is that, yeah, when it was working really well. So you have narratives, patient experience describing a new sense of the self. They're saying that they are born. They're finally reborn with the technology, that the technology has changed their self, and to the point that they are capable of doing what they want in life. They can embrace, they are empowered. There's a form of embodiment, clear narrative associated with emergence. And in one patient in particular, so imagine if you have epilepsy for 45 years, chronic epilepsy, you implant that in the head of people that have chronic epilepsy. That means they can't even walk on the side of the street because they might fall. They can't drive cars. They need to have a constant company with other people, etc. So if you are implanted and you have epilepsy during 45 years, and once you are implanted, the technology can alert you ahead and you have no more symptoms. So that very patient, patient 6, was implanted, and for the moment she was implanted, all the seizures were captured, were alert, and she never had epileptic seizure after that. Imagine the drastic change and positive change in her life. It was just fabulous, spectacular. It's just a miracle story. It's glorious. And that was planned, but to the point that we realized that patient 6 became more and more sort of over-reliant or almost addicted to the prediction. She couldn't make a decision without looking at the device. She always needed the device to sort of inform, sort of being a warrant on her life, which makes sense, obviously, psychologically vulnerable before. And as such, the moment when the company bankrupt, as I mentioned, because neurobies are bankrupt, patient forced to be explanted. And that patient refused to be explanted because imagine,
oh wow,
in epilepsy anymore, the company want to remove the device out of your brain.
Yeah.
And she refused. What do you do? So they were not going to send the police. You have this scenario of Blade Runner where, you know, police can rather do that. Someone has to do it. They refuse. They sort of resist. They might start to hide themselves, not showing up at the meeting, etc. Right? So you face these novel behaviors. But that very patient, since the moment she has been explanted, the device as being dysfunctional, she has had a severe trauma. So is it as severe as epilepsy? Because your life has been changed. You were a de novo person and suddenly it's gone. It also raised question about human rights. What are your rights as a patient? It's quite intriguing. But that was the success story. The ending is a bit sad, but that's due to some financial reason. But also we had the patient 3 who has sort of a curious interaction with the device. It was sort of impeding on her conception of the self identity, because indeed the technology was very effective at telling her that she had epilepsy, but she didn't want to know it. She sort of refused. She didn't accept the fact that she was an epileptic patient. It has led to some severe and drastic impact on her self-understanding, actually, in her case. But again, you have a technology working, but nobody could have foreseen how it would translate for the patient.
Yeah, I see. Do you mind reminding me what year you guys conducted the study?
Yeah, so the trial finished in 2013. So we started interviewed the patient from 2013 and so on. So they were retrospective narrative. Joined the project quite later, actually. So it was a retrospective analysis of their narratives. And actually, regarding patient 6, I'm still in contact with her. I'm very close to submit my final reports. I've been following her for the last 7 years now, actually. We meet on a regular basis. It's quite interesting. She had shared an interview later with Nature Medicine. It's quite intriguing how a brain-computer interface could have changed your life, and suddenly it being gone, it's part of yourself which is gone as well. And she used the narrative of losing a part of herself. Actually, they stole that of herself. That's the type of narrative she's using, for instance. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess this is like kind of foreshadowing some of the things that Neuralink and other companies need to be aware of and hopefully avoid.
Yeah. We know since I would say half of the 2000, thanks to deep brain stimulation, that even if the technology meets the targets, the therapeutic target, it doesn't necessarily translate well for the patient. There's a famous study done in France by Agid and Schubert. The title of the paper, it's called the Doctor Happy, the Patient Less So, where you have got they were the first human to be implanted with deep brain stimulation, and the study report how well the technology has target and reduce and resolve the Parkinson's symptom, but they started to notice that psychologically the patient weren't better; they were worse, actually. Some to divorce, number as high as 54% of people divorcing, which is a bit strange because finally you're sort of free of your symptom. You should embrace your couple, but no, it was leading to some separation, people working, etc. So it led to this idea that a successful technology, a successful implantable technology, brain-computer interface, for instance, could actually lead to what we call the burden of normality. The fact that some patient cannot cope with the fact of being normal. I don't like the term normal, but I would say symptom-free. And that generates psychological side effect. Again, I guess very strange because we're talking about successful technology reaching their clinical endpoint. And this is, as you just mentioned, this is crucial and capital for companies such as Neuralink to actually investigate and look at the human experience within their trials. And they have to take account very early in the development and the design of their technology of human experience. Because again, you might have the most expensive and effective technology, but it might not be psychologically safe for a patient, for instance. And that would be extremely bad, not only for the patient, but I guess for humanity in a sense, in sense that we wouldn't be able to advance and innovate medically speaking. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so like one of the reason that I asked the question of when you guys started, and you said 2013, like to me that's really interesting because 7 years ago these things were already being put in practice, and now I think a lot of folks are hearing about Neuralink or learning about Neuralink because of Elon Musk or whatever their avenue is. It's really the first time that they're aware that this thing exists. It was the first time that I realized it existed. And so to be able to have that real world, information and outcomes from many years ago is really telling. And the hope should be that we're progressing, every year after that. And so now that we're in 2020, hopefully, whether it's with similar implants like before or with new implants, like overall the outcomes are better. At least certainly that's the aspiration. Yeah, so I guess sorry, yeah, that was just a thought
Go
I had.
for it.
I was wondering if there are any things that you guys have continued looking into. I mean, I know you referenced patient 6. Are there other things that you guys have continued researching that are related to the ethics space with brain-computer interfaces?
Yeah, so we were trying to secure funding to go deeper, but we were able to keep looking at some aspects. So one of the elements which was quite urgent to look at was this idea of estrangement. So what we've noticed is that with the implantable brain-computer interface, some of the patients reported feeling of estrangement. And so they embody the technology because they merge, but they describe a form of estrangement. They're not themselves anymore in a way. So, and we've noticed that there is a sort of a restorative enhancement, so estrangement, a restorative estrangement where they describe new capacities. They could do stuff that they couldn't done in the past, right? But there's also a deteriorative estrangement where actually they start losing control on themselves. And that seems also to be associated with the brain-computer interface. And if your audience look at the paper that you mentioned, embodiment and estrangement, first result from a clinical trial, BSI trial, we describe both restorative and deteriorative estrangement. And we were also capable of looking at these parameters within Parkinson patient implanted with deep brain stimulation, where we noticed that many of these estrangement narratives are linked with some impulsive behaviors, and again, which dictate that there's an elements of powerlessness. So patients lose control on themselves, actually, and that's quite risky. And we have found that patient 3 in the study that we mentioned experienced that loss of control. And that's why she started to be depressed and have these distressful feelings. And the restorative capacities described by the patient are actually, with the PD population, are a form of distorted interpretation of the capacities. So we have many examples, and some of them are quite funny, but also tragic at the same time. We have Parkinson's disease patient implanted with the brain stimulation. Symptoms are gone. They change a little bit the stimulation, and suddenly they have this feeling of superhero. So we have a lady, she was 56 and decided that she needed to move the pool table. You know, she was playing pool in the basement. She had to move the pool table. As a result, she almost broke her back. She spent three months in a wheelchair because there's no way that at 50, of lifting the pool table, she wasn't able at 21. Never, ever she would be able to do that. But because of the stimulation, suddenly she had this impulse. She lost control. That's her narrative. And she blamed the implant. We have published that study as well. Similar anecdote where we have a lady, again, in the morning, her clinician twisted a little bit the stimulation, and the lady suddenly have this feeling that she want to meet her husband. But to do so, she's decided that she's going to walk to meet him, knowing that it would take her about 2 days to walk to the place because it's so far away. So a neighbor stopped her because she was walking to see her husband. And again, also blamed the device, the technology for doing so. So we have these, you know, deteriorative elements associated with estrangement. They described that wasn't me. I wasn't deciding. It wasn't me acting on that moment. Something else was intruding on my decision-making process. Similar with what we have seen with the BCI, where the patient clearly used the language, I lost control. I have the feeling I have no control on myself. Mm-hmm. As well, the technology were working very well, effective, but psychologically it has translated in something else, and that's quite urgent. We need to look at these issues. So estrangement, which is not always negative, by the way, as I said, is a positive outcome. And yeah, these are our example. And again, in relation with patient 6, that's where we're asking for some funding, but I haven't been successful the last 2 rounds. We're trying to, I mentioned the Blade Runner example, where, again, think about that. You implant a technology that changed your life drastically, radically, but not own the technology. It's owned by a company. Yeah. Property of the company, right? So they have a legal right to take back their property. But by doing so, they appropriate your existence. In a way, they own your existence, because without the technology, you cannot be yourself. You're not that new person. And at any cost, you want that out of your brain. So you try to avoid the meeting, you're not showing up, you sort of resist, don't reply to the email, don't pick up the phone, right? So that these tiny details seems a bit funny because we are in 2020, but imagine in 50 years if we have more and more of these cases of patient refusing. Mm-hmm. So it's about human rights here, but patient rights as such as, yeah, if you merge with the technology, if you have clear evidence, clear clinical evidence that there's emergence, then does it give you new rights as a human being, or as a merged person, or as a cyborg? I'm not sure how you want to call it, but that's quite important to look into that, because at that point, the technology should not be owned by the company itself, because you should be able to appropriate the technology for many reasons. And that's something that we have to look after. There's already debates about neural rights for various reasons, but I think that's a clear example of where you have a case to look into the legalities of explanting the device. Because the conception is that if tomorrow morning you want to be the first patient to have Neuralink, then you will have to sign an informed consent to get something in your head, right? Because you have to consent for that. You have to agree. But the opposite is not necessarily clear. If they want to get out of your head, you still need to agree, right? But it's not how the law is built at the moment. And it's a form of Swifties, so force you, what I call force explantation. Could be force explantation, could be by physical direct intervention, or it could be by psychological indirect intervention. And there's many ways of seeing forced explantation. All right, I'm too much now. You should you should ask me some question.
No, yeah. Yeah. So do you think the solution to that is allowing the patient at the time of implantation, do you want them to have the ability to buy the entire device outright or rent it, choose to rent it?
Yeah, so in the NeuroVista trial, and actually there's good work done with some company for deep brain stimulation, where, for instance, we had a case of a Broaden trial in the United States. Many patients have kept the device because the experimental trial was shut down, and patients were offered to keep the technology with them. But with novel experimental trials, such as the NeuroVista device, is that, according to them, again, they didn't have the support, the technological support. So if you keep your device and you're in the far remote area of Victoria, the border of South Australia, so how are you going to have technical support if something wrong happened with the technology? That was the narrative. Then you can think that you're right. If you think of a technology which is a bit more spread around, like deep brain stimulation, in the informed consent, you would have a clause telling you, yeah, you might have the option to keep the technology, and the company will make the necessary effort to allow you to keep the technology if it's work point for you. And now with DBS, we see that, but it wasn't the case in the past. Yeah.
Yeah, I see. So I wonder what happens with devices like stents, or like anything that's currently implanted in the body that's not necessarily in the brain. I wonder what happens if those companies go bankrupt.
It's a good question. So this is I apologize for your audience. This is the academic, the scholar that remember reading a paper but can't remember the title of the paper. It's in America, the number of people implanted with technologies and keep it and still have the technology despite the fact that the company is not looking after them is quite high, actually. So there are, well, you know, that there's a lot of biocompatible materials like titanium dioxide. You can keep that almost forever in your body without, you know, you have erosion, but the severities of the side effects are pretty low, and there's not much big issue, if not at all. So you can think of stents exactly that are implanted and will remain there until you die, actually. And we are facing more and more of these cases of Parkinson patients now that were implanted with DBS 15, 20 years ago and dying. And some of these patients asked to be cremated, but they have a technology in the brain. So what do you do with that type of scenario? And we have seen that in the past, you have pacemaker being sent from America to Africa, for instance, or to countries that don't have the capacity to afford the technology. So you can think something similar with electrodes, stents, that not all of them, obviously. And it's interesting because here in Australia, there's a first in human BCI at the moment tested by Spectron. It's called the Synchron, sorry, the Stentron. So they use a stent that they entered by the geniculate and put it in the brain without invading the neural tissue, without opening the skull. And it has been working well, actually. They have implanted 3 patients. So you can think about that technology that you cannot really remove after a while, because you know that the stent will start to interact. There's interaction, there's because it doesn't create a scar tissue compared with, with the UTA array, for instance. We know that after 2.5 years, 3 years, the UTA array is less and less effective because the scar tissue start to impact and erode the implants. And yeah, you can think that these device material can last 20, 40 years in the body, and by then the biology will probably make you redundant.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think so I guess the whole approach of like implanting different electrodes through the veins seems like a a more and more common approach, at least with what I've been listening to and hearing and seeing. Is that something that you think is pretty promising?
It is promising in a sense that you avoid generating irreversible damage to the neural tissue.
Mm-hmm.
So, and as soon as you implant an electrode, it's invasive, so you do cause scar tissue and damage, and it's not always clear what you are actually damaging. So neurons are interconnected, so you might, by intruding in the subnucleus thalamus, you might actually damage some part of your memory. I don't know, that's an example. That's not memory, but that would be, well, who knows, perhaps there's a connection there. So it's never clear. So if you use it's still invasive in the sense that you have to use some vein,
mm-hmm.
But the damage will be less irrevocable, if I may say so. But the side effect, well, not just the side effect, but the downside is that you're quite limited of where you need to put, because the vein and most people are situated around the same area. So if you want to if you think about Alzheimer's disease and DBS or again, Neuralink, they like this idea. So you could see that there will be limitation of where you can put the stent actually, because it cannot go everywhere compared to an implant that you can actually put in place in the brain. Again, Neuralink might be just sitting also. So yeah, you're an engineer, right? So you probably have a better answer than I here. But in terms of ethics, if you can remove irreversible effects, that's great.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. I studied civil engineering, so my knowledge is pretty limited about like how well materials interact with the brain and what areas are good, go or no go zones. But I think so. Last time we spoke, you talked about like basically there are certain tools that we use today that if we remove them, then we no longer feel like, we're fully ourselves. And then you kind of mentioned it, or you talked about it earlier in this conversation. So I wanted you to talk about like comparing those two with like, if we have a navigation system in our car and we're like heavily reliant upon it, and then it gets taken away, I don't necessarily feel like I'm losing part of myself, but it significantly impacts like how I think about where I'm going. Like I all of a sudden feel like, okay, well, maybe now I have to remember like all of these different streets and think about like the layout of where I'm going and stuff like that. What do you think is the best comparison to that in the form of like brain computer interfaces?
Yeah, thanks. This is a very interesting question. The navigation system have shown that some people are losing their ability to conceptualize maps in their brain because they are overly and addicted to the interface. They don't even bother to think, oh, where's north south, because it's
Mm-hmm.
right in front of them.
Right.
So it's fine for us because we are in between generation where we know what is a map, right? We have seen a map before, and we have these interfaces. So, but if we think about the new generation that never will have to look and learn about a map and are only dependent on the interface, so you're still vulnerable, extremely vulnerable to the interface if something happened to the interface. So that's the risk here, is that if you lose the ability to access the interface, then I'm not sure if we're still capable of relearning how to use a map. And again, that's a metaphor to explain, for instance, digital dementia and how it impacts the notion of authenticity. How do you know it is really you? How do you feel that it is really you? And digital dementia, it's simply the idea that we are observing in teenage and young child that some of them are losing the ability to fabricate memories because everything is accessible there. So if you ask them a question, they say, oh, I know it, but they have to Google the answer. And they say, oh, I know it, it's right there, but that's not really there. It's the cloud, right? So there's this identity and authenticity. No, it's not you, it's the cloud. But they associate themselves with the cloud. But so digital dementia is simply the fact that you cannot really remember what is the item, but you will remember potentially the path that led you to the item. So it might, instead of just say, oh, that was 1757, the civil fight, for instance, right, in Quebec. Then it might take you 5 minutes to remember, oh yeah, when I saw that, I was at that page, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we're not sure how that will translate, because it seems that some kids are losing their opportunity to fabricate syntax, orthographic corrected sentences, their ability to conceptualize mathematics, because everything is accessible there. But it's this idea that there's, again, I'm not, sorry, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that these technology are not here to enhance and assist certain happiness. Obviously, you and I are happy to fly in a plane that is overly commanded by a AI system, right? So this is not my point, but just thinking about how biological and elements that in the past were helping us to and guiding us to various ways. That could be even to know yourself better if you listen to your biology instead of listening to a device telling you that, you know, here's your data, that should mean that's right. So and then we might losing this sort of what I call the phenomenology of of knowing yourself in that way. So it is quite intriguing when you receive and read anecdote of people stop trusting reality and because they dispute it because they saw it on the interface. I have this colleague once who told me that he was looking for an hotel in Paris, and he was obviously relying on the GPS, and GPS was telling me that was the address, but that wasn't. But he was disputing not the device, but reality. Started to doubt that, you know, this was the case, instead of just say, oh, that's my device who has an issue here. Instead, it was just a couple of, you know, doors away. That's an example of where you have a clear sense of a notion such as authenticity that might be threatened by a brain-computer interface. In some cases, I guess it's not a generic or general observation here.
Sure.
So your question, I'm not sure I was answering your question, actually.
Yeah, sorry, it was a badly worded question, but you got at the heart of what I was wondering, which is like the term of digital dementia, and just like describing how you know that phenomenon I think is real. Like,
yep,
I think a lot of people that are on the younger side often think that they're extremely smart because of how much access they have to all the information at any given time. And so it ends up being like, you know, my thought is like, okay, well, at any given time, if I want to learn something, I can find it on YouTube like pretty quickly. So then it's almost like I can go into any situation feeling like, okay, well, that's in the back of my, you know, that's in my back pocket.
Precisely.
Whereas a lot of older folks, they're very heavily reliant on their experience, and that experience used to be extremely valuable. And I mean, I think it still is extremely valuable because they end up getting like these niche cases that other people would never be able to find online. But then at the same time, it's like, wow, we just have so much access to information. And then I don't know that it really like becomes a part of us, but it just feels so close that it might as well be a part of us.
Yeah, but I guess that's it's an interesting paradox. And think about this example too. Let's say you're meeting that person and you quite incline, have a infectious feeling toward that person, and you want to write a letter, right? But you have assistant AI system writing on your behalf, right? It's not really you writing, right? That's not really your feeling. It's an AI system that just generates words. So how can you be honest and sincere toward that person? And obviously I could say, yes, it's me. The device know me better, but that's the point of being in love, I guess, is to, being able to translate, even it's very difficult. I guess that's why we have movies, as theaters, plays, just to translate this feeling. Every culture talks about that feeling, but precisely because it's humanly difficult to comprehend. It's not because of AI would throw words that would reflect your the most core element in your existence. So that's also an example of authenticity, honesty, sincerity might be trigger, and what we call in français la mauvaise foi, bad faith, where you're not very honest toward yourself first. Anyway, good topic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I'll add like a little side tangent story. Like Elon Musk has this school. It's called Ad Astra, and I think they recently renamed the school. But anyway, he has like I think 5 or 6 or several kids, and most of them go to the school, and other students are like I think Larry Page's children go there. So the founder of Google, one of the founders of Google's sons, and then some other like pretty well-known people's sons or daughters go to the school, and they have no grades, and they just learn like anything they want to learn basically, and it's all hands-on. And then Elon was saying that, oh, well, at our school, we're not going to teach any of the students language, because in the future, we'll just be able to download language to our brain directly. So it's not a skill that these kids have to learn at the beginning. And I mean, I guess I should just say that, like, I'm not 100% true that this is the case, but I read it somewhere, and it's like, wow, I don't know if that's, it's like, maybe it'd be really useful to learn a language, not only for the sake of learning the language, but also for like building those connections in the brain, to strengthen those muscles.
Yeah, I like the metaphor of muscle. Exactly, it's I guess doing that would be neglecting very important biological element, and I think we're still biologically human. Again, I'm thinking that we're at some point we'll have so much dependence on technology that we might question the blurry line. Even nowadays, it's difficult to be a human without a mobile phone. So it's an external element. But yeah, you're right there. Learning a language, I'm not sure many languages you speak, but learning a language also mean and refer to the feelings of having the language. And it's not something that you can develop in one click. The meaning of the word trauma, for instance, you can learn that word when you're 7, then 14, 21, etc. And you will realize that every time that you relearn what means that word, that evoke many different realities and memories for you. And that's why language are so linked to humanity, actually. And some language will strongly dispute this position. And if you cannot acquire a language, then you cannot develop the ideas, actually. It's not the opposite. You don't necessarily have clear idea if you don't have a clear language. Many philosophers have this position, for instance. No, if you don't have the words, you cannot have the ideas, basically.
Do you believe that that's true?
For some specific, subtle, very elegant idea, yes, clearly. I guess that's what distinguishes humanity from the rest of some animal. You can, from very clear, I would say instinctive idea, no, we probably share all the same. We want food, we want to sleep, we want to have a place to pee, for instance. But when you start to have more sophisticated ideas, as mathematics, for instance, and very subtle calculus, you need that language. You need the concept in order to develop the language, right? It is in that. So if you download that in one click, again, I'm quite skeptical that we're going to be able to do that. But even if we can do that, I think we're going to miss a big chunk of what it means to be a human into that.
Yeah, I see.
I'm probably too romantic for you.
Okay, so I guess I'm curious about, like, one of the last questions is, I'm curious about what you think are some of the pros and cons of what Neuralink's announced so far and what they're trying to build towards.
Again, it's a promising technology, and I hope for the best. And against Elon Musk being providing evidence that is capable of crystallizing his intuition. So again, it's a very promising technology. So again, I'm repeating myself, but I guess it's very crucial for them to implement early on a window or a room where they would be able to look at the human experience within their design, right? And this is central because again, even if it's the best technology, it's working because it does target the clinical outcome. It doesn't mean that it would translate necessarily and positively well for the patient. Again, I'm repeating myself, but this is crucial. And the pros is that, yes, so there's pathologies out there that we've been trying to treat for decades and it doesn't work. So one of the pros is that, yeah, with innovative technologies such as BCI, we might be able actually to tackle these pathologies. And we know that many patients implanted with brain-computer interface, so paralyzed patients, are capable of having a form of restoration by moving a prosthetic limb, or even we have patients that actually can move now their paralyzed body and regain feelings, for instance. So that this is fabulous, and this is one of the reasons why we need to invest and encourage that type of research. Not only because we'll be able to address many folks, and that's, I guess, the large majority of them that have stroke, for instance, and suffer from paralysis, for instance, or loss of part of their brains, etc. Right. So, and the again, I'm not sure if these are cons, but the idea is that we have to be careful about surfing on the hype here, where there's a lot of speculation, and a risk is to inflate a bubble, right? Speculative bubble. That involves ethical speculative bubble, where we create so much hope for some of these patients that it might not at all being able to address their issue. And here I'm trying to be as clear as possible. We did a media review, news outlet review of every time that brain-computer interface was mentioned into a news outlet, we did analyze it. And most of the time, 76% of the time, it's a positive description of BCI, right? About 76%, 25% were overly positive. About 24% were about enhancement, claiming that we're going to repush human boundaries, we're going to go beyond human capacities, etc. Mm-hmm. And overall, 2% were mentioning the risk. So it's quite, intriguing. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we know that patients educate themselves via media, for instance. So I don't know exactly your, but perhaps there's someone in the audience now that had a stroke, or someone's paralyzed and want to learn about Neuralink, and they hear so much positive outcome, a positive description, that they believe the hope is there, the expectation are there, that they will be happy to enroll, be the first person, but that might not match the clinical reality at all. So, and we're working with many patients that are being implanted in experimental trial. And most of the time, the ending of the clinical trial is not a happy ending, right? So they help to advance the science, but there's always a human cost associated. I mentioned patient 6. A trauma was induced to her, right? Because the company bankrupt. But again, if you're paralyzed, you are implanted, and you're capable of having some restoration, and then after 3 years, the implant doesn't work anymore. And we heard about this patient in the past where they refuse to be explanted, for instance. And again, the point is that if you read so much positive element about it, you might enroll in a trial where the technology hasn't reached its proper ability to convert. That's an example. There's more, but time is running. And but no, again, I'm very looking forward to see the development of Neuralink. It's very exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, like, I guess that was part of the reason that I, started this whole show, was just, I'm fascinated by the potential, and I realize that, it really is just potential right now. But given the track record of those in the past, it's like, wow, you just kind of end up expecting it to happen and then it just ends up being a matter of time. So then I think really the time expectation is really tough to just like taper and make sure that we're being clear on like how long it's going to take.
Yeah.
I think also you and I talked about this last time when we spoke offline. It was like Elon often wants to set really, really ambitious goals so that internally the team is like
Yep.
pushing, pushing to meet those goals that he stated. And even though he knows that he might not be achievable, like it'll be really, really difficult to achieve. So it's tough for him to also strike that balance.
No, indeed, yeah. There's a rhetoric associated with innovator, entrepreneur. They need to have a rhetoric to advance their knowledge and their efforts. It's part of the job somehow. And especially in our markets, if you are you want to have some investor, you're not going to depict your technology negatively. Otherwise, you're not going to attract any investor. But in a free market, I mean. But yeah, again, but the risk is that by being always ambitious or describing speculative and potentiality instead of reality, you might lure potential patient into that belief, and it's often difficult to make them, to bring them back to reality. It's often called the therapeutic misconception. You have patient enrolling in research trial, an experimental trial, and the language and the informed consent, it's clear. It's a research trial. It's an experimental trial. They don't mention any therapeutic outcome, but the patient is in the belief that they will receive a treatment. And as such, they have a misconception. And it's quite difficult to make them change their opinion, actually. And there's a possibility. I'm sure things will go well for Neuralink if they test the device in human. And again, I'm pretty sure that very soon you will see an effective outcome where potentially a paralyzed patient implanted with Neuralink will be able to move a cursor on a screen or potentially use a prosthetic limb. And because now these technologies are pretty fast. So I was thinking of talking about the Stentrone. Last week, I had a webinar, I attended a webinar, and they said that the first patient took something like 30 days to being able to move around the mouse and the screen. And the patient took something like 24 hours. And you could see a decrease. Wow. Fast it goes. Yeah, so you can think that if you get the implant in less than 24 hours, you're always capable of moving around. And even in the past, I remember talking with some patient implanted with BCI being paralyzed, and took them months to masterize how to convert, translate, decrypt. And now it's quite amazing. So yes, it's quite promising. But here, maybe I'm repeating myself, but if you have an implant in your brain, would you prefer having an implant in your brain to move something on the screen, or just using a device in your hand, a wearable? It's like most people still want something outside potentially, because we know that you need to change phone every 2 years because the technology advances. It would be the same with an implant where you would need to be reoperated. Again, this is a negative description, not necessarily, but it's a possibility. But that being said, I don't have a mobile phone, so I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm one of the rare human beings.
Oh, wow.
I'm still capable of affording an existence without a mobile phone. It's more and more difficult to be a human without a mobile phone. Soon I will have my own YouTube channel about how to survive without a mobile phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
See the face of my student when I say that. Nobody really believes it's possible, but yes, it's possible.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that is rare, but that's pretty cool, actually. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for having this discussion, and hopefully we can, reconnect again and do another similar conversation once there's more progress.
Yeah, but also thanks to you, because I think it's because of a YouTuber like you and large audience personality like you that actually we're capable of disseminating the idea that there are risks associated with these very spectacular technology, and we need to talk about them. It's not because you're only being positive that the risk of will just go away, right?
Sure.
So, and if we want a very sustainable technology, we need to address these ethical questions very early. There's plenty of examples in technologies. Asbestos, for instance, was revolutionizing everything, and then we discovered that was leading to cancer. That's plenty of examples. Same with electrode, brain-computer interface. Megan, thanks for taking the time to listen to people like me.
Yeah, definitely.
Hopefully we can catch up soon, yes.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Dr. Gilbert. I appreciate it.
Thanks, thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.